Okay, next I'm going to try to get the throttle bodies off. So potentially first thing to do there is to disconnect the throttle cables, and from what I understand, doing it at the handlebar end is easier than trying to mess with any of this. Just leave this alone and pull the whole thing out as an assembly. Okay, this is disconnected here, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. Okay, I'm moving on to take the other connectors off, which is the next step. But I want to see if I can get better access to the injector connectors. I can't seem to either access them or take them off, so I'm not sure which of those connectors we need to take off right now. So let's see if we can get these guys off. Okay, we have these four connectors taken off. So one is this actuator here, number two is the map sensor here, number three is this other side of this actuator here, and number four is this white connector here, which I'm not sure where it goes to. So I took those four off. I'm going to change track a little bit and try to get the clamps which are holding the throttle body taken off. Now these are accessed from the side of the frame here. They have a couple of holes on the sides of the frame that allow you to put an Allen key in there and loosen it. If you look at the bottom, like right here, I don't know how clearly it's visible, but you can see the clamps that are actually holding the throttle body physically onto the engine head. So let me see if I can access these clamps out here. So this is the hole on the left side of the frame. This guy right here is the hole on the right side of the frame. This hole right here. So you need to put a 5mm hex through there, and you should be able to reach that bar looking thing between the two throttle bodies right there. I'll try to highlight it in the video. I'm just using a 5mm Allen, going in this hole in the frame, and it should be really loose. I'm going to loosen this till I see it back all the way off. Now, the clamps are loose and I should be able to get this throttle body off. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to use the airline and just give everything a blow here. I think I just got it to pop. Yeah. This connector is a bitch. Okay, after much struggle, managed to get this guy disconnected. Now still have this green connector here to go. There's a black connector here with a yellow and black wires going to it that I'm trying to get disconnected. There we go. This guy is out. Then this green one is the final one giving me trouble. This guy right here. Hopefully that's visible. I'm going to keep attempting to take that off. I believe that is the last connector that is keeping us from taking the throttle body out. I'm transferring these from here to the actual intake because I want to prevent as much dirt from getting in there as possible. So finally, to get the throttle body off, we have 3 hoses. One is this guy at the front of the throttle body that has a little clip on it, and then there's this guy on the throttle body right at the end, no clip, and then one at the bottom of the map sensor. So let's get these off. The last thing is this idle speed adjuster that sits on the left side of the bike. I'm just gonna pop this out of this bracket and pull it up with the throttle body. So the throttle body is out officially. These rags are stuffed in here just to keep dirt out. I'll do another round of cleaning before we mess around anymore here. We will also be cleaning out the throttle bodies themselves. It's a really complicated piece. Give it a good clean before we put it back. Next thing I want to do is to get the radiator off. So I know it's possible to do the whole valve clearance check without entirely removing the radiator, but it's much easier to get the valve cover off the front, and removing the radiator seems relatively simple, and we're going to do a coolant change. It will also be a lot easier to actually check the valve clearances on the exhaust side if we have the radiator off, because we can put the shims, the gauges in from this side and then measure it. So let's get to draining the coolant and peeling the radiator off. Draining the coolant is just a simple matter of taking this bolt off. So this is the water pump assembly, and this is the drain hole. So we'll pop this off, drain the coolant, pop this off and open the radiator cap, and that will drain all the coolant out. I also want to take this chance to kind of let me grab the light to kind of show how much oil leakage there has been on this bike. Looks like a lot of it is coming from the valve cover. because it seems to be flowing downwards from there. It's just oil everywhere. Yeah, we'll make sure we get all this cleaned up before we put everything back together, but yeah, it's just a big mess of oil everywhere. Anyway, so I'm going to just pop this bolt out and then drain the coolant and proceed from there. So this is pretty typical. The coolant won't flow out because the system is sealed and the radiator cap is pulling vacuum on the other end. As soon as I pull the radiator cap off, you should get a whole bunch of coolant coming out. Yep. There we go. Next thing I'm going to do is start disconnecting the radiator hoses. So this is the lower hose here, which will take off. Then there's this electrical connector here, that rather cable routing connector here that needs to pop off. This connector needs to come off because this is what powers the fan. So we have 3 hoses on this side that need to come off. This bottom hose here, obviously this main hose here, and this overflow, this one that connects to the overflow tank. Although I suspect this may not need to come off because we are going to pull the overflow tank together with the radiator, but we'll see how that goes. And then as far as I can tell, there's one bolt here right on top that's holding the radiator on from this side, and there's this bolt here that's holding on to the bracket, and then at the bottom there is this bolt here that we need to take off. So far those are the ones I can see. I believe that should let us take the radiator off. Anyway, let's get on with it. As usual, I'm going to use a hose pick, stick it in here, break the stiction. Let's try to work it all the way around. There we go. Hopefully this should separate pretty easily. Yep. Cut this guy off. Let's go over. Okay, let's get this electrical connector. Hopefully this is visible. Take off this electrical connector that I showed earlier. This guy's out. I can use just a little prying device, pop this guy out. Looks like this guy is going. Where are you going? Okay, there's one more hose that is over here. So there's one more hose here that I'm going to take off as well. That's connecting to the reservoir. I just don't want to bother with taking the reservoir off, so it's probably easier to do it this way. Okay, let's get the hose disconnected on this side. This one's a bit fuzzy. I don't think this has ever been off. Oh, this one's fuzzy too. I believe that's all the hose connections removed from the radiator. There's this guy. It's part of the evap. I think I'm just going to take this bolt off and let it hang out here. So, I don't like all of this stuff just hanging here, so I'm just going to use a zip tie and try to secure this somewhere. Okay, next I'm going to go and take that bolt off right there. It looks like a, hopefully that, you don't see that. Anyway, that looks like a 10mm bolt, 10mm bolt. I'm going to take that off. Next I'm going to take this guy off right here. So obviously I did forget the bottom hose that was sitting on the coolant reservoir, but luckily I was able to pull it off pretty quickly there. So that's the radiator out, which is just perfect. Let's put this away somewhere safe. And we'll continue with our disassembly. Let me bring you in for a closer look at the front of the engine. So obviously this is where our radiator used to live, but you can clearly see there's a bunch of oil leaking from here, which is coming from the valve covers over there. So it's high time we were doing this, so it's a good thing that we're getting to it when we are. So our idea is to get this valve cover off and then measure the clearances, swap the valve cover gasket, stopping this oil leak. We'll give everything here a good clean, obviously. Yeah, okay, moving on, continuing with disassembly. I think potentially the next thing that I want to tackle is gonna be this guy, which is the secondary air injection thing. Is that, I forget what they call it. So they call it the air switching valve. So this guy, we'll need to take this guy off, mainly because it gets in the way of us removing this like rubber sheet that they have on here. We need to peel this back so that we can get access to our valve cover. Sorry, while you weren't looking, I did tape up these intakes here. So it looks like it's just held on by these tubes. There's nothing actually mounting it. Let's see if we can get it off. Alright, that was easy enough. Now it does seem to be tied to this harness here. Let's take this guy off. Okay. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is get these 4 coil connectors off and then try and pull the no, we won't pull the coils out yet. We need to take the engine mounts off before we do that. There's an electrical connector here that is on the secondary air valve here. Just a mounting tab there, so I wanted to get this out of the way. Okay, I think we're gonna have to disconnect that connector because the rubber sheet is going over it. Okay, I must 100% remember to reconnect this guy. Another thing that I just did was on the left side of the engine there is this bolt on the valve cover that holds this electrical connector as well as these 3 hoses in this bracket here, and that bracket is bolted to the side of the valve cover. I just took that bolt off and moved these out of the way. We have to remove that bolt anyway since obviously we're taking the valve cover off, but it also facilitates access to the top of the engine. The other thing I also did while you weren't looking was I grabbed this harness out of the way, and taped it out of the way, as well as those couple of evap emissions hoses were also taped out of the way. I've just been going around and trying to see what will potentially get in the way of us accessing the valves or the top end of the engine and taking that off. And I might have to do something about this big gray connector here as well. So let's see about that. Yeah, definitely have to do something about that because it appears to be bolted to the valve cover as well, or fixed to the valve cover. I don't know if it's bolted. Let's figure out how it's attached. That's easy enough. There's just a little tongue on the back of this far side of the connector. You can see here. You just lift that up and pull it off the valve cover. So that's easy enough. But I think I would like to get this connector disconnected and move the 2 halves out of the way. Again, in the interest of having more access, or rather unfettered access. Anything that can dip into your valve train and get dirt and stuff in your head, it's a bad idea. The more access you can have around here while you're working, the better, in my opinion. I know lots of people, experienced mechanics, will work around all this stuff, but I'm just a DIY guy. I'd rather take the 10 minutes to do all this stuff and have a better chance of not messing up anything inside the engine. I'm gonna leave that alone for now and move on. It's proving to be really pain in the butt. So next thing I want to do is take these engine mounts off on both sides. So there's one bolt here, one bolt over here underneath, and then obviously this guy. So we'll still have the main engine mount holding the engine up, which is fine for it just being static right now. There's no load on the engine, so let's get these taken off. Both of these appear to be exactly the same, and there is another 12 behind that. Yeah, sorry, it's hard to see, but I can barely see it myself. Alright, so that's out. As you can see, these are the two 12 millimeters that bolt in from the bottom like that into the frame. This guy bolts here, this guy bolts here. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, hopefully this is a better view and you're able to see. Looks like the engine wants to lean forward a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do is give it a little bit of support from the bottom here. Probably going to get a small jack and support the engine from either the starter or the oil pan. Okay, so I just kind of had this arrangement here. I'm going to just support the engine in case it wants to fall forward. I mean, it should be totally fine because it has this engine mount, and we're just removing these two, so the main engine mounts are still on. Before I pull the coils out, I'm going to just blow this off with the airline again. So I see that the rubber sheet is sort of trapped by the engine mount here. Obviously we don't want to take these engine mounts off. So I think I'm going to make a little slit in this. It should, excuse me, it shouldn't functionally affect anything, but it should allow us to fold the rubber sheet all the way back and get it out of the way so we can work. So I'm going to just make a slit on both sides and then pull the rubber sheet up. But yeah, it's really not going to change the functionality of the rubber sheet by making that tiny little slit there. It's totally fine. I'll probably maybe try and glue it back together. We'll see. Now, finally, we have full access to the part we were looking to mess with. It's obviously quite disgusting here, and I'm going to have to do a good job of cleaning this before we open anything and get any kind of mess into the engine. So yeah, more cleaning. Hooray. The next step is going to be taking the coils out and then the valve cover off. But before I do that, I took the opportunity to go around and clean everything up the best I can. Just getting all the oil and grit off of around the valve covers as much as I possibly could, like cleaning around these areas, anywhere where that sealing surface, mating surface between the valve cover and the head actually is. So as you can see, I got most of the oil and dirt that I had collected over the years. As I was saying, yeah, so anywhere where this mating surface is, I've cleaned off, gotten all the grit and dirt that I had collected over the years before we pull open and expose the oily bits. Yeah, I also took an airline and blew things off as much as I could, so we should be pretty safe to pull the valve cover off now. So the plan is to take the coils out and then pull the valve cover out this way. Obviously, since we have access and we don't have the radiator in the way. So let's get to that. Taking the valve cover off should be a simple matter of getting these 6 cap head bolts off. This looks like just a 10 mm hex. Actually, let's pull the coils out first. The coil should essentially just pop out. Might need a little bit of help. Just gonna use a light pressure here. Yep. Let it come off. Just using the cloth so that I don't mar the valve cover. So this is why we had to remove the engine mounts. So the engine mounts would be down here. So these coils barely clear. You kind of can wiggle them out and flex it out. So there we go. So I'm just going to mark where these coils came out of. Not that it makes any difference, they're all perfectly interchangeable, but I just like to put things back where I found them. I'm just going to paint mark it. Okay, let's take off the valve cover bolts. Okay, this this should have been obvious to me, but it looks like this bracket also will have to come off for the valve cover to come out, because it's basically trapped by this bracket. So I'm gonna take this off right now. So the main engine mount is this guy still sitting here, but this bracket, this L shape or inverted L shape bracket, is what's holding up the valve cover. And that's the valve cover off. The gasket is still trapped on here. It should need to get off. Yeah, this gasket is super brittle. It's cracked in multiple places. Yeah. This guy's obviously leaking. Okay. See, most of these grommets are stuck on here, and sometimes the cause of the leak can just be these grommets getting hard and compressed over the years and not applying enough pressure on the gasket to seal it. But in this case, it looks like the gasket itself was in pretty poor shape. Let's give you a closer look at the valve train. So here's the valve train in all its glory. Let me see here. So this cam is the intake cam, and the one further away is the exhaust cam. And we are going to be measuring the clearance between these lobes here, and there are like inverted buckets sitting on top of the actual valve itself, and that clearance is what we are interested in. So we'll have to measure 16 of those, so 4 per cylinder, so 16 clearances, 4 intake and 4 exhaust. And to do that, we'll have to spin the cam around to where the lobes are pointed essentially straight up, right? So we want the cams to be on their base circle, which is zero lift essentially. So these lobes have to be pointed straight up. So right now we could measure this guy, and we'll have to spin the engine over to get each of these cams in a position where we can measure the clearance. And the manual has a procedure for where to measure each cylinder, but in all honesty, It really doesn't matter, as long as you're in the base circle, you are good to measure. Obviously these measurements have to be taken cold, and the intake and exhaust cams have different clearance specifications. In order to spin the engine, we will be taking this cover off. I think once we get this off, we will expose the nose of the crank, and we'll be able to spin the engine using that. So here is the cam chain itself, and the two cam gears. So I'm hoping that the clearances are fine and we won't have to take it off, but in case any of the clearances are out of spec, we'll have to get the camshaft themselves out. So take off the cam caps, take this chain off, pull the cams out, and then change the shims that are in between the bucket and the valve itself. But first let's get everything measured. So next I'm going to take this cover off. It's just a few 10mm bolts, it looks like. Hopefully none of these brackets are in the way. Yeah, should be fine. Right, let's proceed with that. Many times you'll end up having different size bolts. It's just a little bit of oil. So obviously we haven't drained the oil yet, but the oil sump is down here and the oil level is here, so it's significantly above where the oil level, resting oil level is, but obviously there's going to be some residual oil. So this is your missing tooth timing wheel, and this is the sensor. So this is what tells your ECU where in the rotation your crankshaft is, and obviously you can see, hopefully you can see. Let me bring you in closer. And there you can see the chain. So this chain is what is driving the cam gears here. So this chain connects the crank to the cams and times the engine. And you can see all these timing marks on here. So this is cylinder 1 and 4 top dead center, and this is cylinder 2 and 3 top dead center, and then we can see some corresponding marks in on the cam gears themselves. So these are the gears, these are the markings you would use to time the engine in case you took the cam chain off, but yeah, hopefully we don't have to do that. So we can use this big nut here to spin the crank around. So this is the end of the crank, nose of the crank.